Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to kick off now. I've got plenty of people on, so without wasting anyone's time, let's get going. Hopefully, we'll be able to see my screen from now on. Okay, so a few things before we kick off. We've got two presentations this morning. I'm going to be covering off the core cow presentation. So my name's Adam Thornton. I'm one of the sales managers at Bytes. Following me will be Jack Watson, who's one of our senior account managers, and he will be presenting EAP and ECI. Throughout the presentation, everyone is muted, but you can submit questions. On the right-hand side of your screen should be a little box where you could submit your questions, and what we'll do at the end of both mine and Jack's presentations, we'll go through and hopefully cover off all the questions that you've submitted. We will be compiling an FAQ document with all the questions that have been logged, and that will be sent out after the webinar's finished. And if you could, when you come out of the webinar, you will be asked to fill in a brief critique sheet, just asking did the webinar meet your expectations. If you could fill that in, that would be fantastic. Okay, without further ado then, let's get going. So there's the agenda for this morning for my core cow presentation. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of Bytes. For those of you that don't know us and for those of you who do, hopefully it won't be too much of a recap. I'll cover it off quite quickly. And then I'm going to talk about some volume license options, primarily just focusing on the topics that we'll be discussing today around core cow, EAP, ECI. Then looking at the core cow and enterprise cow suites, what the components of those suites are, and what the changes are moving forward from, well, what the changes that came into effect on the 1st of August. Then looking at briefly some procurement considerations. We've got down Q&A, but we will hold that to the end of both presentations. So, to give you a brief overview of Bytes, we founded in 1982. We've had record growth over the last 5 years. Last year we turned over 148 million. We split our business into three key areas. We are a dedicated software services company, so one of our divisions is licensing, the resale, the management of clients' licensing. We have a leading software asset management division. We were the first Microsoft partner in the UK to get the gold certification in software asset management. We also have a learning solutions division where we resell training for all vendors, for all technologies, and not even IT, it can be anything. And lastly, we have an ecosystem of technical SI partners. So we have a small technical offering through our software asset management division, but we actually have a, well, as most of the vendors see it, market-leading partner ecosystem. So if you have any technology requirements, we have partners in that system that can help you and assist you with your technology projects. We are consistently in the top 5, actually top 3 large for Microsoft in the UK. We are similarly accredited and high up the ranks with other software vendors. We have more Microsoft licensing consultants than any other partner in the UK, well over 60 now. And we're not just a UK business, we are a global business as well. So for the purposes today, to go back a step, Microsoft very much differentiate their agreements, and they use a rule of thumb with the number of PCs that a client has. So they have agreements for clients with up to 250 machines, and they have agreements for customers that have over 250 machines. And what you see is on the left-hand side, you've got your open agreements, so whether it just be an open license, an open value agreement, a company-wide agreement, or a subscription agreement. Some of those allow the purchase of license and software assurance. Some are license and software assurance mandatory, some are just license only. On the right-hand side, what we have is the agreements that are focused with customers with more than 250 machines, namely the Select Plus, Select Licensing, which is obviously now end of life, Enterprise Agreement, and Enterprise Subscription. On the Enterprise and Enterprise Subscription agreements, and the other agreements that Jack is going to come on to later, those have mandatory software assurance, and that's really what we'll be focusing the time on today. One of the benefits, obviously, of software assurance is you get software assurance benefits. Microsoft split those up into 5 key areas: deploy, use, maintain, transition, and plan. to give you a very high-level overview of the benefits, you have benefits in there that can help with technology deployment, end-user training, technical person training, home use programs so that you can get the ability to use Microsoft software, namely Office, Visio and Project at home for a massively discounted price, but also extended hotfix support, technical support for your server infrastructure. Okay. Hopefully this is pretty standard to most people, but Microsoft work on the basis of you have a server and a client access license to access the most of the core infrastructure services and software. So for example, Microsoft split their CALs into two different options. You have a standard CAL and you have an enterprise CAL. A standard CAL allows a user to access, as it says there, the fundamental services of the server. So for example, accessing into your file and print servers, but then what they also do is they have the ability to have an enterprise CAL which gives clients more functions. So particularly in something like SharePoint, you have a SharePoint standard CAL which will allow you access into a portal, but you have then the SharePoint Enterprise CAL which will give you the extra functionality, searching across different portal sites, the way that the metadata is tagged, etc. Common misconception is that you can either buy a standard or enterprise CAL. Actually, the way that Microsoft work it is that you buy a standard CAL and then you can buy the enterprise CAL. So the CALs are what they call additive CALs. You can't have an enterprise CAL without a standard CAL. So now we know what a CAL is. Let's look at what the Core CAL suite used to be. So the Core CAL suite up until July of last month, end of July last month, contained a Windows Server CAL, an Exchange Server CAL, a SharePoint Server CAL, and a System Center Configuration Manager CAL. Now these are, where applicable, these are all standard CALs, and these allow the access of a user into those various systems. Core CAL as a suite of products can only be bought under volume licensing. It must be bought with software assurance. It can't be bought without. If you want to buy the components separately, you can do, but as I'll cover off on one of my later slides, there are advantages of buying the suite because Microsoft offer a discount for buying that suite. Okay, so as I said before, Microsoft differentiate and have two types of CALs. They have their standard CALs and their enterprise CALs. What we've got here is on the left-hand side we've got the components of what used to be the Core CAL, and on the right-hand side we've got what used to be the enterprise CAL. As I stated before, in order to get the client licenses that are in the enterprise CAL, you would have to buy the Core CAL as well. So you've got a number of options. You can buy Core CAL and a later date upgrade to enterprise CAL. You could buy Core CAL and enterprise CAL, or there is Microsoft do a SKU which covers both client suites all in one. But typically, if you're looking at where the first line, so if you've got Windows Server CAL in the Core CAL suite, across to the right, what they try and do is line up the equivalent of the Enterprise CAL, so then you've got Windows Server Rights Management. Exactly the same with Exchange. You've got the Exchange Standard and then the Exchange Enterprise, SharePoint Standard, SharePoint Enterprise, etc., etc. Okay, so to give you an idea, as I mentioned, Microsoft do offer a discounted price if you buy the Core CAL suite of products as opposed to buying it separately. So what we've got here is some pricing examples, and this is based on comparing Select or Select Plus with EA and Enterprise subscription. And these prices are as of July, and they're based on 3 years worth of software assurance. So if we look at when we can compare buying the components of Core CAL separately, you've got Windows CAL at £33.13, Exchange £75.37, etc., etc. The total component cost for those four products comes in at £259.24, whereas actually if you were to buy the Core CAL suite under the same price list, the same select price list, it actually comes in at £222.82. So you can see already there's a saving there. If we then compare Select against Enterprise Agreement, Perpetual, we have two options here. We have the Core CAL, if you are literally just licensing Core CAL for all the desktops in your environment, or we have the core cal with the platform discount. And the platform discount means that you're also going to be taking Office Professional Plus and Windows operating system. But if we look, so we've already on the select, we've got a price of £222.82. If we then move that straight onto EA, which would mean you'd have to cover all the desktops in your environment, but that price would then move down to £177.48. If we then look to go even further and take that as part of a platform with the other products that I mentioned earlier, that price can go down to £150.60. To take it one step further, if you are a company that you don't like to necessarily own the licenses and have those as an asset of the business, and you like to be able to write licenses off through maybe OPEX, then enterprise subscription is an option to look at. And the price reduces down even further. As the name of the agreement suggests, this is a subscription agreement, so you don't own the licenses. You do have the ability to buy out those licenses at the end of the agreement, but you can see that moving from a price of £150.60 under the EA Perpetual, you can actually get that price down to £98.20. So we put in here a maximum discount over buying all of the components separately versus maybe subscribing under an enterprise subscription agreement. There could be a maximum of 62% discount. What we've then done is we've replicated this working for the enterprise cal as well, and if you can see that by buying all the components separately, by buying all the components separately, you could be looking at a cost of £838.72 under a select agreement. However, if we move that to the enterprise cal suite as opposed to buying the components separately, it then comes in at £579.48. Compare that again to the enterprise agreement at £347.04, and again the platform discount, so we're taking not just the enterprise cal, we're taking Office Professional Plus and an operating system, that comes then down to £301. Again, replicating with the enterprise subscription, you can look at a maximum discount over buying the components separately. If you license under an enterprise subscription agreement, under a platform SKU, you could look at there being a maximum of 61% discount. So the changes to Core Cal Suite. So as of August the 1st, there are two products that have been added into the Core Cal Suite, and those are Link Server Standard Cal and Forefront Endpoint Protection. So the ability to have instant messaging present through the Link, what used to be Office Communication Server, and the ability to bring antivirus software into the Core Cal Suite through the Forefront piece. So all the other components remain the same. It's these two new components in Link and Forefront that have been added in. So to give you an idea of the pricing changes, so obviously you can probably guess from looking at the wording of this slide, this was a presentation I did before August the 1st, but anyway, the pricing changed and the use rights changed as of 1st of August 2011. For Core Cal, there was a pricing increase. For the Enterprise Cal step up from Core Cal, there's a pricing decrease because obviously you've taken two components out and added them into Core Cal, so there's not as much of a cost to upgrade from Core Cal to Enterprise Cal. But the pricing for the full eCal stack will remain unchanged. So what Microsoft has simply done is they've given the ability to use more of the software within the Core Cal and taken some of the functionality and the software out of the Enterprise Cal. Overall, the Enterprise Cal prices doesn't change. To give you an idea, the percentage changes. What I will say here is that if any of you that are currently in the halfway through an agreement, partway through an agreement, whether it be enterprise, whether it be an open value agreement, any type of annuity agreement where you've got Core Cal already, the great thing is that you have the ability to use these extra components straight away. You don't have to get requests for special permission from Microsoft. You can start using Link Standard Cal and Forefront Endpoint Protection straight away. But to give you an idea, price changes. So the increase in price for a professional desktop license with software assurance, so that's your Core Cal, your Office Professional Plus and your operating system, the pricing as of August the 1st went up by approximately 3%. If any of you are coming towards the end of the agreement and you're going to be looking at renewing Professional Desktop, then you can expect to see probably about a 3% rise in the renewal cost for the software assurance. For any of you that were looking or might be looking to license just CoreCal, license and software assurance, or for any of you that have CoreCal renewals coming up and you're going to be looking at renewing the software assurance, there is a 10 and a 14% price rise respectively. And as I said before, the price for actually upgrading from CoreCal to Enterprise Cal is actually 9% cheaper because those extra components are now back into the CoreCal. So, as I mentioned, customers with existing CoreCal prior to July 31st, so if you had it as part of an enterprise agreement or any Microsoft Volume licensing contract, any CoreCal licenses you had will automatically get the new components at no extra charge. If you license through Select, the CoreCal pricing obviously does fluctuate month to month, as Select pricing is not fixed, but the pricing increased approximately by about 10% for CoreCal on Select. And customers with CoreCal prior to July 31st will also be able to purchase the step-up licenses at the reduced amount. So you've got the extra components free of charge, and you actually benefit from the pricing reduction in the step-up to Enterprise Cal. So procurement considerations under enterprise subscription, as I've stated before, if you're partway through, you will get access to the new components at no extra charge. Great thing about the enterprise agreement is that pricing is fixed, so you won't actually see a pricing increase until the end of your agreement. And customers with CoreCal as part of those agreements will be able to true up and won't have to pay the higher price until your agreement expires. So to summarise, Link Server Standard Cal and Forefront Endpoint Protection are part of CoreCal. So as of 1st of August, they were included in the CoreCal. Existing customers will automatically gain license entitlement to those products. Obviously, we know we're after August the 1st. There has been a pricing impact, but for customers with enterprise agreements, you won't see that pricing impact until your renewal. So until the end of your agreement, you'll be able to true up and still pay the commitment price that you signed up to when you started your agreement. And any existing CoreCal customers that are thinking about looking at Enterprise Cal, I would suggest work with your Bytes account manager, Microsoft Business Manager. We can firstly discuss the options that you have available to you and see what commercials we can help with. And on that, I won't do the questions. What I will now do is I will pass over to Jack Watson and he will kick off the EAP presentation. I will just put myself on mute while we change over. Bear with me.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Jack Watson. I'm Senior Account Manager here at Bytes, and as Adam alluded to earlier in the presentations, we'll be covering some of the new specialists enrolments around the Enterprise Agreement, EAP and ECI. Just a very brief agenda in terms of what we're going to go through in this second half of today's webinar. We'll look into an overview of the enterprise enrolments, first and foremost the desktop enrolment, which Adam has touched on, and then how these specialist enrolments work for the Enrolment for Application Platform, or EAP. Have a look at how the agreement works, the mechanics of the agreement, and some of the benefits that they can yield, and then move on swiftly to the Enrolment for Core Infrastructure, or ECI, and have a look at some of those infrastructure service suites operate. As Adam said, all sort of questions, feel free to sort of fill them in as and when we go, and we'll sort of tackle them at the end. We're running slightly ahead of time, so hopefully we've got plenty of juicy questions to get stuck into at the close of today's session. So these new specialist enrolments from Microsoft, ECI and EAP, sit around the Enterprise Agreement and Enterprise Subscription Agreements. Both of these agreements, as Adam had mentioned, include mandatory software assurance. But what they really represent are new enrollments that are specific to certain Microsoft product sets and give you a great deal more benefit and more importantly, a cost reduction on some of the licenses that are included within each of these enrollments. As an overview, many of you may be familiar with the desktop enrollment for Microsoft Enterprise Agreements. And the way that Microsoft really structure these is there is a overarching enterprise agreement, and then underneath that agreement you have the ability to sign both a desktop enrollment, an enrollment for application platform, and enrollment for core infrastructure. And each of those are really focused around a certain product set. So just to reiterate a couple of points which Adam has already mentioned, the desktop enrollment is around the Core Cal Suite and Enterprise Cal Suite, Office Professional Plus, Windows 7 Enterprise, and there's an ability to add additional Microsoft products in that particular contract. The enrollment for application platform has it really focuses around SQL Server, BizTalk, Visual Studio, and SharePoint Server. Again, all requiring mandatory software assurance over the course of the 3-year term. Similarly, ECI allows you to add in Windows Server, System Center products, and the Forefront Client Security Suite. And what we're going to do is dive a little bit deeper into how each of these two enrollments work around desktop enrollment, EAP and ECI. So just very briefly, summarization of the desktop enrollment is there on your screens. Windows 7 Enterprise, both the Core Cal Enterprise suites that Adam's talked about earlier and the Office Professional Plus suite. So for EAP, the enrollment for application platform, first and foremost, it's a 3-year contract, very similar to the desktop EA. And what you need to do is cover 100% software assurance for all the licenses that are included in this particular contract. There's a minimum initial purchase for each of the products that you can include within this specialist enrollment. And the way that it works is very similar to the enterprise enrollment for desktop, whereby you can annually true up any increases in the initial footprint that you include in the contract, or indeed have a 3-year true up model whereby you're committing to year-on-year growth with Microsoft. There is a discount level tied to this enrollment for application platform, and it's really tied to if you've got an existing enterprise agreement for the desktop or select agreement, then the discount levels you'll receive on EAP will match that of that master enrollment. One of the key points with regards to both EAP and ECI is that it is not a prerequisite for you to have a desktop enrollment for enterprise in order to qualify. All you need to do is hit the minimum initial footprints for the products that are included. So let's take a look at some of these products that are included in EAP. First and foremost, SQL, which tends to be the most popular and the easiest way to qualify for the footprint of an EAP enrollment. For both the 1-year and 3-year true-up options, you can qualify with 5 per processors for SQL Server, whether that's standard, enterprise, or data center edition. Alternatively, if you operate on the server cal mode of SQL volume licensing, then you'll need a minimum footprint of 250 cals and 5 server licenses at whatever edition it is that you require. BizTalk Server, very simply, is licensed and always licensed on a per processor basis, and you'll need 5 processors in order to qualify for this particular contract. Visual Studio, you'll need 20 licenses of the Visual Studio suite. Visual Studio obviously coming with the MSDN subscription as well, because of that mandatory requirement to include software assurance under the contract. SharePoint very simply has 5 server licenses, or indeed if you're using SharePoint for external purposes, then SharePoint for Internet sites, there's a requirement for 3 server licenses under the agreement. As an overall view, obviously there are various different editions of SQL Server, BizTalk, Visual Studio, and SharePoint for Internet sites, ranging from standard, enterprise, and data center edition. Depending on what edition you have, really sort of depends on the cost savings that you'll have over and above a normal desktop enterprise agreement, and that's approximately 40% on some of those premium editions like enterprise and data center, or 15% on anything standard, whether that's SQL Standard Edition, BizTalk Standard, Visual Studio Pro, or SharePoint for Internet Sites Standard Edition. So having a look at how you can qualify in the minimum footprint in order to start an EAP, the way that it works is slightly different to how Microsoft Volume Licensing historically has operated. Typically what you'd find is that if we take SQL as the perfect example, what you'd find is perhaps you might have purchased a number of SQL licenses, license only, a number of years ago, and perhaps they're only eligible for SQL 2000 to date. If you wanted to move to the latest version of SQL, 2008 R2, what Microsoft would require would be for you to purchase outright brand new volume licenses at the latest edition for 2008 R2. What Microsoft don't do as a general rule is take into account any credit or historical purchases in terms of lowering that upgrade cost. But with EAP, we see a slight departure of that, where Microsoft has really sort of softened the blow in terms of enrolling into software assurance and getting the latest version of licenses. And for the purpose of this slide, what I'll do is I'll take SQL, as it's the most popular, as an example in terms of how this can work. So in order to hit those minimum footprints, if you're licensing SQL on a per processor model, what you need is 5 SQL per processor licenses in order to qualify for this contract. The way that you can qualify those 5 processor licenses are in one of 3 ways. First and foremost, if you have any existing licenses covered under software assurance and you would like to renew that software assurance, and you can renew it into this contract. So any expiring SA can count towards that minimum footprint of 5 processors. Alternatively, if you've got a net new requirement for SQL, then you can purchase a SQL 2008 R2 license with SA, and that again will sort of help you qualify towards that total count of 5 processors. And the third way, which is really sort of represents the departure from Microsoft from the way they've typically operated around these enrollments, is that you could take an existing SQL 2000 per processor license, for example, and to simply buy the software assurance and apply it and assign it to that historical license. And what that allows you to do is ultimately defer the license payment for upgrading to SQL 2008 R2 for the duration of the contract. The contract duration is for 3 years, as I mentioned earlier. So in that example, what you would do is you would just buy software assurance, pay the annuity on software assurance over that 3-year contract term, and then at the end of the agreement, what you'd have is an opportunity to either renew and continue the EAP, whereby you just continue your software assurance coverage, or secondly, if you decided to exit the EAP, which presumably you'd have rights to the latest version of, or you would have rights rather, to the latest version of SQL Server, but you would pay that license-only payment that was deferred when you first entered into the EAP. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that there are those 2 sort of examples in terms of how the enrollment works, the 1-year true-up and the 3-year true-up. To go into that a little bit further, the 1-year true-up is really around once you hit that minimum footprint for the contract, any increases you have don't need to be declared until the anniversary of the agreement, and it's at that point you simply true up and purchase that cost for adding any additional licenses in, and they'll all enjoy the same discount level of any licenses that are initially included in the agreement. With the 3-year true-up model, what Microsoft have done is said you can negotiate with them in terms of saying, I'm going to move to an EAP enrollment, hit that minimum footprint, and you can get a increased discount level in terms of year-on-year growth. Microsoft have really set that as 20% year-on-year in terms of that initial footprint of 5 processors and then moving onwards and upwards on an annual basis. That is something which you'd have to pay that 20% no matter, regardless of whether you actually had a requirement for those increasing licenses, and it does represent significant investment in terms of a significant upgrade of SQL database or net new installation of SQL. So it doesn't, at the moment, doesn't seem to be one of the most popular ways of doing it. People are very comfortable and customers are very comfortable with using a 1-year true-up model because it works very well with an enterprise desktop enrollment, whereby you just simply each year taking stock of what additional licenses you need and declaring and purchasing those additions as and when required. So some of the key benefits around EAP. First and foremost, it's a lower upfront cost, so you can take advantage of the latest versions of SQL, Visual Studio, and SharePoint, as well as BizTalk. That ability to take into account some of your historical purchases which didn't have active software assurance and therefore defer that license payment over the contract term of an EAP is a very soft way of entering into the agreement and upgrading to the latest and greatest of application platforms. There are savings on some of the new deployments of up to 40%, 15% if you're using standard editions of these licenses. And those savings are over and above a desktop enrollment. So anybody on an enterprise agreement or looking to a desktop enterprise agreement in the near future, traditionally what would happen is you'd add in some of these additional products like Visual Studio and SQL and BizTalk into that enrollment. Now what you can actually do is separate those out into a separate enrollment, this specialist enrollment, and enjoy a greater discount level than that you'd get under a desktop EA. The EAP will also allow you to rapidly adopt the latest technology. The 3-year true-up model really gives you some increase in deployment rights for the application products, but as I said, you're committed to a 20% year-on-year growth if you choose that option. And it's a flexible purchasing model for EAP. What we can do is put together cost models in terms of some of the existing investment you might have in some of the qualifying products, and see if it's something that's really going to reap value for you and reduce your licensing costs over a 3 or 6 year term, over and above perhaps just purchasing it under a Select Plus agreement or the desktop enrollment. And that moves us swiftly on to the enrollment for core infrastructure. So the enrollment for core infrastructure is really focused around Windows Server, the System Center stack of products, and Microsoft's Forefront Client Security, which is antivirus and anti-spam. What it really represents is an easier, more flexible way of purchasing a number of licenses for data center optimization. ECI can be purchased as either a perpetual license agreement over a 3-year term, or indeed as a subscription. So it can sit hand in hand with a perpetual desktop EA or a enterprise subscription agreement, perhaps where you've got Pro Desktop or Core Cal or Office Professional Plus under that particular platform. So the traditional way of licensing these products through Microsoft's volume licensing contracts is to purchase, on the left-hand side here, a Windows Server license for every physical or virtual installation that you have within your environment. And with regards to System Center and their suite of products of System Center Configuration Manager, System Center Operations Manager, Data Protection Manager, and Virtual Machine Manager, and more recently their Service Manager platform, what Microsoft would require from a licensing point of view is to purchase server management licenses for each of the servers that those particular technologies are managing. And they really split that down into both the enterprise and standard edition of licenses. Standard edition licenses are a license that's required for any of the servers that are file print or using basic workloads, and the enterprise and more expensive volume license for managing those servers is really around if you've got an application on that server. So all application servers would require an enterprise server management license. And then on top of that, you'd have your antivirus, and if you chose Microsoft's Forefront technology, then that's licensed on a per device basis as a subscription. Now there's various different ways of that each of those individual products can be licensed. With Windows Server, obviously there's the per server route if you're licensing standard or enterprise edition. If you're licensing Windows Server Data Center, then you can license that per processor. With the raft of System Center Server Management MLs, you obviously have this split between whether you need the Enterprise Edition of Server Management licenses or the Standard Edition of Server Management licenses, all of which can be purchased either per device or per operating system environment if we're looking at a virtualized platform. And also there's a per device based subscription for Forefront. Now what that has is cultivated a bit of confusion in terms of how all these products are licensed. And if you have a number of servers within your estate that you would like to perhaps look at a certain set of these system-centered technologies, and have an obvious requirement for Windows Server 2008 R2, then the ECI may be something which you'd be interested in looking at. What Microsoft have done very simply through this ECI contract is simplify the licensing model into just a per processor model. So you'll buy a per processor license for the various different suites which I'll come into under ECI, regardless of whether it's Windows Server Standard, Windows Server Enterprise, or Windows Server Data Center, and that all-encompassing license ultimately is going to include the full stack of System Center products as well as the forefront client security. One of the things that are pretty key to note, that even though this moves to a per processor licensing model, Windows CALs are still going to be required for all users or devices that are going to be accessing these Windows servers across your estate. And if you choose the standard edition of ECI, then that won't include the virtual machine manager or the service manager elements of System Center. But it's not too much of an obstacle, if not a hurdle at all, because if you were moving to a Windows Server Standard way of licensing, the way that the virtualization rights of that particular platform say that you will need a license for every physical or virtual installation of Windows Server. With Windows Server Enterprise, it's done on a ratio of 1:4, whereby one Windows Server Enterprise license will entitle you to run up to 4 Windows Server VMs on that host, and similarly Data Center, one per processor license will give you unlimited virtualization rights. So the need and the exclusion of VMM within the standard suite of ECI, as I say, isn't much of a hurdle, because if you were heavily or lightly even virtualizing your Windows Server platform, then you'd be really sort of more cost effective to move down the Windows Server Enterprise licensing route. So moving on, how can you qualify for ECI? Well, first and foremost, it's a 50 per processor license count that you'll need. You need mandatory software assurance similar to the EAP. And those 50 per processor licenses are really sort of based on Microsoft's assumption that the vast majority of servers are going to be dual processor. So a 25 server count can qualify you for an ECI platform. The savings of these platforms are approximately about 20% over simply including these System Center and Windows Server products under a desktop enterprise enrollment. So if there is a data center or a server infrastructure upgrade going on, then there's an opportunity to do cost modeling here, which obviously you can engage with your Bytes account manager and determine whether this is something that's not only going to give you more technology, but perhaps also reduce your licensing costs across your Windows Server estate. The 3 different infrastructure suites under ECI follow the Windows Server way of licensing their editions of Data Center, Enterprise, and Standard. To start on the right-hand side here of the slide, the Standard edition is for single processor servers. It will allow you one virtualized instance across sort of a basic workload Windows Server Standard edition license, and it will still include the full stack of System Center products, but also the forefront client security suite. One of the key things to note there within the System Center stack of products is that the server management licenses will all be standard edition under this particular suite. So that is for file print and basic workload servers. In terms of a cost comparison, were you to buy Windows Server Standard Edition under an enterprise, a desktop enterprise enrollment, purchasing the Standard Edition suite is only 15% more than purchasing it as a standalone Windows Server license under the desktop enrollment. So you're getting a significantly more bang for your buck, really, in terms of including that full stack of System Center. And the break-even point is typically around including 2 or maybe 3 of those System Center products. And effectively you'll get the rest of the products for a price which is less than if you were to purchase those server management licenses individually. The second infrastructure suite is for the enterprise. It is it's focused around servers with 2 processor licenses. It's approximately 88% more than if you were to buy a standalone Windows Server Enterprise license. However, you obviously get the full stack of System Center products and forefront client security. The System Center server management licenses were included within this pack are all Enterprise Edition. What that means is you'll get the virtualization rights ratio of 1:4, so a single one of those licenses will allow you to run up to 4 virtual machines on that particular physical server, and you'll get the full stack of System Center products on application servers. Within the Data Center edition, very similar, it's for servers with 2 or more processor licenses. The cost difference between purchasing this as a suite and just simply Windows Server Data Center license on its own is approximately 5%. However, you're also getting the full stack of System Center products again, with those unlimited virtualization rights, assuming all processors within that physical host are covered under one of these server infrastructure suite licenses. So why is ECI really good for customers? Well, it's what they really do for any customers looking at 2 or more of the System Center suite of products. It simplifies the licensing model into a per processor model rather than different ways of licensing both System Center, Forefront Appliance Security and the Windows servers. It's a combined offering, and obviously there's a significant discount associated with purchasing it as a infrastructure suite, and it's easier to administer because of the 3-year true-up model that you have, which can simply run alongside an existing desktop enterprise enrollment, or you can have it running standalone. And just to reiterate that point, it is available both as a subscription as well as a 3-year perpetual model. There's a lower cost under the ECI, so there's savings over simply purchasing these products standalone. And as I mentioned earlier, one of those key points is if you're looking at least 2 of the System Center management license products, that may be System Center Configuration Manager and Operations Manager, for example. There's mandatory software assurance under ECI, very similar to EAP, and it will deliver savings over time because of its ability to fix pricing from the start of the enrollment right up until the end. You can choose the level and scale of the agreement. Obviously you can pick between each of those individual infrastructure suites of standard, enterprise and data center, and as long as you hit that 50 per processor count, it's an agreement which you can qualify for. So overall, the highlights of these 2 specialized enrollments of ECI and EAP are that you don't need an enterprise desktop enrollment in order to qualify. If you can hit the minimum footprint counts of each of those 2 enrollments, then it offers an opportunity to standardize and simplify the technology that you're using, as well as the licensing model as well. Overall, they offer lower upfront costs over and above the desktop enterprise enrollment, and assuming you're a software assurance customer or software assurance is key to your business moving forward, then it represents a viable option under Microsoft's volume licensing schemes. There are savings under some of the new deployments of up to 40%, depending on what addition of server licensing that you require, whether that's standard enterprise or data center. And with EAP specifically, there's that opportunity to defer the license cost of upgrading some old licenses onto the latest platform, and just very simply pay software assurance only over a 3-year period and continue software assurance, or indeed at the end of the 3-year contract purchase that license only costs that you deferred at the start of the contract. So where Bytes really can come in here is talk you through the mechanics again in a little bit more detail, and I know this webinar is being recorded and all questions we're going to tackle a little later, but there'll be an opportunity for us to go into a little bit more detail and perhaps discuss each of these specialist enrollments and how they can affect you particularly as a business. Secondly, what we can do is assess your current licensing model and see if you can qualify, or indeed if there's any opportunities for us to take advantage of ECI or EAP. Sometimes what this can include is perhaps, if we take the example of EAP and SQL again, is to take a Microsoft report of all your historical volume license purchases and see where there's an opportunity to perhaps take advantage of some of those old SQL licenses for 2000 or 2005, or indeed some of the old 2005 Visual Studio licenses, for example, that you could perhaps upgrade, defer the license payment for a 3-year period, or indeed not pay the license payment at all if you're going to continue software assurance under these particular contracts. One of the key reasons why software assurance is mandatory under these particular enrollments from Microsoft's point of view is really on 2 levels. First and foremost, it is to the ability to annualize and fix the software licensing costs. And secondly, it's focused around their cold server backup rights, which is a really key software assurance benefit, whereby if you license your production environment with software assurance, then it negates the need for you to have to purchase additional production licenses for your DR environment. If you don't have active SA, then you do need to buy production licenses for disaster recovery and backup. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for your time this morning, and what we'd like to do is sort of run through some of the questions that we've seen come through on the presentation thus far. And I think what we'll do is we'll start off with some of the questions from an ECI point of view.
Okay, don't know. So, read the question.
Okay, so one of these first questions we have here is, can the EAP and ECI be taken mid-term for desktop enrolment? And is there any way for it to be co-terminated? First and foremost, if you've got an existing desktop enterprise enrolment, the licenses included under that agreement must run for the full term of that existing contract. So it's only when that contract 3-year term expires that you'll have an opportunity to enroll into EAP or ECI. It's not something that you can take mid-term in terms of any licenses you've already included in that desktop enrolment. Any new licenses requirements that you might have, say for example you've got a significant true-up around SQL or Windows Server Standard, then that represents an opportunity to start an EAP or an ECI. But unfortunately they are not co-terminated. It will start with a 3-year term and it will run for a full 3-year term.
Okay, is that coming through? Hopefully everyone can hear me. So pretty much the other questions that we had are, will the copy of the slides be distributed? Yes, they will. We will be sending out the slides following later on, hopefully this afternoon. But in the meantime, if people do have questions, Kylie will be sending out a copy of the slides, so by all means fire any questions back to Kylie or to your account manager, and where we can help we will. And I think right, someone has asked a question, will there be a session on cloud-based licensing? The plan is we are looking, we have done a Office 365 licensing seminar recently. We can replicate that as a webinar if that would be of use. We can get in contact with you about that. But at the moment there's nothing planned for cloud, but we can get that added in. It's easy for us to do. I think that's it. So unless there's any other questions that people want to submit through now, otherwise we can take them offline and you can send those through to Kylie or your account manager. But other than that, thank you for your time. And if there are any questions, please fire them across in due course. Thank you.